Hello, this is Karen Powers-Wand from the Mindful Earth Keeper, and I'm doing our thought of the week for the week of February 6th, 2023. And in this week, I'm going to be talking about how do we harmonize our lives with the past. It's my belief that we are constantly doing this, whether we think so or not. We are taught to do this by our families, by school, by our communities, by the work we do and what we need to do to succeed. And if we want more harmony in our present, we often need to change how we harmonize with the past. And in this week's video, I want to talk about a book that I started reading over Christmas called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. And it's by David Graeber and David Wengrow. Unfortunately, David Graeber died in 2020, right before this book I think was published, and it's an amazing tour de force. You can see it's a thick book. It's about 500 pages of the general book, and then you've got another 100 pages of notes, and it's really written like a thesis, I'd say, and it has a sort of an long introductory abstract and a whole bunch of research. And then if you look at the very end of the book, the conclusion is very similar to what I think you might see in a thesis. And I want to actually read the last chapter of the conclusion to talk about the myths that they look at in the research, in a sense. So here's what they're saying. And they're talking about myths at the very end of the book. And here's what they say, is we can see more clearly now that what is going on when, for example, a study that is rigorous in every other respect begins from the unexamined assumption that there was some original form of human society, that its nature was fundamentally good or evil, that a time before inequality and political awareness existed, that something happened to change all this, that civilization and complexity always come at the price of human freedoms, that participatory democracy is natural in small groups, but cannot possibly scale up to anything like a city or nation state. And you can see from those assumptions he's talking about, those are everything they've covered in this book. So there's a lot that they've covered. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that really shapes everything that we do with harmonizing. And I would say that the Dawn of Everything authors would probably agree that none of us, no matter how learned we are, knows everything there is to know about the past, especially ancient history. But the two writers of this book were an anthropologist and archaeologist who have things to teach us about how to question the past. As human beings, we tend to come to conclusions about what can be learned from the past and create general rules or myths about the past. And I want to share a couple quotes that I think are indicative of what goes on, particularly in American society. This is a quote from Andrew Carnegie. Many of you can know he was a famous entrepreneur and philanthropist of the early 20th century. And this quote of his encapsulates what many of us have been led to believe. And while the law of competition may sometimes be hard for the individual, it is best for the race because it ensures the survival of the fittest in every department. And then, of course, he was probably influenced by Darwin, and who talked about survival of the fittest this way. In the struggle for survival, the fittest win out at the expense of their rivals because they succeed in adapting themselves best to their environment. Now, what I like about The Dawn of Everything is it challenges this belief and other beliefs like it, that many of us were taught to harmonize our lives with ideas like survival of the fittest and many others. Now, most of us who care about the sustainability of the planet need to deal with the myths and partial truths that keep us from harmonizing with the rest of life on Earth in the wisest ways. And a big thread in The Dawn of Everything is questioning the role of freedom and equality in shaping history. In a way, it's so difficult to summarize the whole book because it does discuss everything from the sophistication of indigenous tribes to and their views on freedom and responsibility, to the role of women in innovating agriculture for thousands of years, and the realization by the authors at one point in the book that domination and exploitation seems to occur in cycles, as do hundreds of years of relative peace, and the movement towards dystopia and utopia are not necessarily linear paths in either case. One of the ideas in the book that I think we should consider as we look at how to be more sustainable in the world is a description of three types of freedom. The freedom to move away or relocate from one's surroundings, which we can imagine was greater in some ways in the past. The freedom to ignore or disobey commands from others. The freedom to shape entirely new social realities or shift back and forth between different ones. Now, from a sustainability point of view, these freedoms are a lot of what we're trying to balance out and harmonize. And we are in a state of discord with nature in many places in the world because people live in places that can't support the amount of human population there. With climate change progressing as it is, more people will need the freedom to move. And that's what people at other times did during climate changes. We live in a time when millions of people may need to move, and we don't have plans for addressing that very real, not only possibility, but reality. When I helped to create the sustainability plan update for the city of Aurora a few years ago, I added a focus on resilience, which other people beyond me also wanted. My particular reason for wanting that in the plan was that I believe, and I still do, that we need to plan for people moving to the Chicago area in the next 50 years. And that sounds a long way off, but it's not. A little less than 20 years ago, I remember watching a presentation by the city of Chicago with experts on climate change coming in talking to city of Chicago leaders and saying what was expected by 2100. And we were told in that meeting that the city of Chicago area, the Chicago metropolitan area, is expected to have the climate of Houston, Texas. Now that's not here now, but almost everything that those experts predicted back in 2004 or 2005, whenever I saw this presentation, have come to pass. And they've come to pass faster, not slower. We already have climate change refugees. Many people attribute many of the wars in the Middle East to droughts increased by climate change. And when drought conditions occur in countries that don't have the wherewithal to import food and water, situations like what's happening in Somalia, Syria, and Yemen occur. And we know that there are people migrating away from those places, but this is just the beginning. If we stick to a survival of the fittest mentality, millions, if not billions of people will face starvation in the next 20 years. And this is one of the reasons that climate change scientists worry about the future being dystopic. The dawn of everything challenges the ideas of what was truly successful in the past. And in my view, we need to create new harmonies from the past. For instance, we can discover and align with the collaborative and innovative models of the past, which have existed since ancient times, often at the same times that greed-driven and exploitational social systems occurred. The dawn of history begins by comparing the Iroquois and the Wendat cultures of North America to the European culture of the same time. The Native Americans saw Europeans as barbaric, greedy, and frankly horrifying, and often we've been taught the opposite history, seeing indigenous people as savages. Whether we like to believe it or not, we do harmonize with the past. Even when we intellectually separate our views from those that are harmful around us, our community, or the earth, sometimes an unconscious part of us has a strong pull to be in harmony with the predominant worldviews that we were taught. That's why a book like The Dawn of Everything can be helpful. Let me show the book one more time. Silly things coming up on my phone. Get this book. And this week I want you to consider three actions. First of all, consider reading this book, The Dawn of Everything. It's a big book. It's been out since 2020, so you can probably find it in the library. If you feel like it's overwhelming and you don't have time to read the whole book, just read the last conclusion chapter because it tells you a lot of what their conclusions are from the research they did. Ask yourself, is there any way that you're harmonizing your life with collective ideas and myths about the past that keep you stuck? This may be hard to do since most of us are unconscious of our unconscious beliefs, but look for areas in your life where you feel like you're exploited or you allow yourself to be exploited, where you feel powerless or that you feel that you have less value than other people or you're told that you have less value. There's probably a myth you're harmonizing with or being forced to harmonize with. And you might be able to do something about that. So in number 3, choose to harmonize with the past in a way that inspires you, helps you to be more innovative and free. And next week, I'm going to be teaching a simple way of harmonizing your past with the present, involving working with imperfect passions. I think it's more individual. This week, we've been talking about the collective a lot, and while I'm trying to bring in some individual ideas to you, I think sometimes we really do have to think about how do we affect the collective and how does the collective affect us. And I hope this has been useful to you. And if you are just hearing this on YouTube or some other place, maybe on Facebook, and you'd like to hear more of these more often, consider joining our newsletter or subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm really happy that you're one of those people who cares about sustainability, especially if you've listened all the way through this. This is a more intellectual talk. Next week, I'll be more practical. I really appreciate you being part of the Mindful Earthkeeper community, and I'll talk to you again next week.